Tiger Day. As you do. This guy in the
I wonder if he's like a proper girl, right? He's 50 now, so he'll be a product like that postmodern, like, he's in the, I wonder if he's a full host one, doesn't give a shit about anything, kind of generation, which still thinks it's really cool and still thinks like Blur is the best band like ever, great concepts, yeah. I'm really great with hypothesis just like shows backstage. You know like the comedians doing there aren't like mean to you. So they just ask you questions and then don't like give you anything to like respond. I feel like they'll be like that whole everything I've seen of them. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's
So just give us a wee wave when you're. Yeah, you can start.
I've turned it off. And mine?
Do you want to give the mics a try?
La 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 la.
Is mine on as well?
Gorgeous.
Yeah. Definitely do not. You can keep going. After your poems.
Yes.
Hello everyone. Can we get started? Yeah, perfect. So we are going to get started, and then Sean will perform some wicked for us after. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a bonus.
Welcome everybody to the Edinburgh launch of Strange Beach, this beautiful collection. The first debut poet from Fitzcarraldo's new poetry print, also very exciting, by this wonderful author who is a good friend of mine. I've known for a while, who's as fiercely kind as he is intelligent, and so I'm really excited to be here with all of you. So I'm going to read Oluwaseun's official bio first, and then we will get started with the conversation, and then I'll kind of explain the format after that. Yeah? Okay. So Oluwaseun Olayiwola is a poet, critic, choreographer, and performer based in London. His creative and critical work has been published in The Guardian, The Poetry Review, PN Review, Oxford Poetry, The Telegraph, The Times Literary Supplement, and elsewhere. His choreographic work has been presented at the V&A, The Place, Central School of Ballet, and Studio Voltaire. He has been commissioned by Royal Society of Literature, Ledbury Poetry Festival, Southwark Council, and Studio 3 Arts. Sean has an MFA in choreography from the Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance, where he was a Fulbright Scholar in 2018 to 2019. He lectures in dance at the Kingston School of Art, and Sean is a member of the inaugural Rose Choreographic School of Sadler's Wells. I'll get better with my with my stuttering as we go on. So Sean, would you like to start us off with a reading, and then we'll get into some questions.
Yeah, perfect. First, thank you for having me here. Thank you for all being here at the Edinburgh launch. I wasn't until recently I figured out like every time you do something for the first time in a new place, you can call that a launch. Because I was like, isn't it just launch once, but it launches multiple times, and it's really special to be doing it with Alycia, who I've known. I guess we parasocially knew each other since 2021. when we kind of got involved with lettering, met a couple times, and so I'm just really grateful for you doing this. Also, as fiercely kind as you are, fiercely kind, son. Fiercely kind as you are, intelligent and critical and creative and just such a warm spirit. So thank you for doing this. And again, thank you for being here. Lighthouse, thank you for hosting this event. It's been such a great day in Edinburgh. Thank you, Claire, for being here. The best publicity director in working in publishing. I can say that with a lot of confidence. So thank you again. I'm just going to start off, I'll read for about 10 minutes and then we'll go into a hybridized conversation. I often, as I say, it's difficult to talk about what a book is about. There are the themes that run through it of queer desire, family, intimacy, sex, blackness, and yet I feel that the voice is perhaps the tissue or the thread that brings it all together. And so I'd hope that the poems in some way do speak for themselves. There is some really good copy on the back that I think will tell you some specifics, but I'll start with the reading and just kind of flip through and see where my consciousness wants to enter. So I'm going to start with this poem called Fumbled Sonnet, which is not at all a sonnet, but is actually about 20, maybe it's like 28 lines. Fumbled Sonnet. Ocean, though from below you can't quite tell. Below, not in it. What's the saying? It is impossible to be on the outside of your situation the way cure is yoked like a blue ember to diagnosis. Okay, I'll say it. The new lover must fuck the old one out of memory. Pressure, point of contact, all this they decide, though speed is of the utmost importance when it comes to time's bold effects. Heaven of the body smudged like a ghost, losing its yell because it gets one more day as matter on earth. What would you say differently if that thing you thought was dead could matter once more? Brightly, the blade's luster blinds whom it has decided to renovate. You know nothing about the feeling, but that your abdomen is, after all this thinking, bleeding, swelling with blue light. The mark. And having been cast away, different to being thrown out of the light by wind, though what truly these days is the difference when the body is law-like, always involved, when the scatteredness grief makes of devotion lies before you like a stupid adjective rolling in the grass. Inevitable is the way any swinging thing finds rest, as in what we ought to do after being fought into parenthood. What we leave behind at the bottom. A violent fire dream hollowing out the seen through to space behind the eyes like a tattoo. My mother forbade us from bringing any permanent mark to our skin. Sun, crack in the wall. My mother had visions, I think, with grace and aplomb is how I stole them. The book is in 3 sections, each one starting with its own strange beach. And this is the 3rd event in the Scottish arm of this tour. And so at the first one, I think I read the second one. At the second one, I read the first. So this one, I'm going to read the 3rd strange beach, which is also a response to Dorothea Tanning's, one of Dorothea Tanning's paintings, which is called Sunflower Landscape. Strange beach. It's an opinion the stars are unspoilable, arrayed, random in the night sky, lifting the plucked sunflowers' corpses from where they gather. Marred by death, even they shine. Perhaps they shine because, look how quickly they vacate their positions. You can see it in their faces, the sand petaling definition in the seams, unlike the sheer, immaculate garments they'd become. If only they'd surrendered what served to root them. Fidelity brought them here. Is that fair? Or is the way their leaves ache, calling the boy into the waves, simply concerns restitution? The living have already been simplified. The sand is not sand, but law. On the forever curling horizon, dark becomes light blue serrations, inferring time. Had we control of it, could submit its fissures, subdividing the beach into its discrete, fecund elements. Where I walk, I leave no trail, because a thought with legs is not a man. Do you get it? You were deposited here just as that assemblage of pebbles one day mimics a rock. One day, no one can follow you here, not having to become something else. Maybe I'll just read two mid-length poems and then a tiny one, and then we can get to chatting. Oh yes, thank you. I'm gonna read the one on page 17 now. This is the second poem in the book, but somehow I was on page 17. We were talking about this earlier, like how much front, I think it's called front and back matter, no? Yes. See, I'm getting good with the publishing lingo. This one's called More Night. In the book of unusable minutes, the passengers like skyward lights. Sun lifting his broken arms like a dying thing, the burning center moving along time's cargo, archaic gauze, each perpendicularity, amazed patchwork of veins where healing had words to unpick and kept its mouth shut, a John Deere child in the cabin. Long haul. Year of trillions and the plane soaring into its wilding airscape, the farther out distances of carbon. Is this my airborne home I cannot outrun? These, our eyes focusing downwards, where God is just this once. Yes, the origin of interiority from our lungs, starting blank weather, and do you hear it? The ears in our chests. The past in each of us blistering, chapping, the pus arriving like snow, sleepwalker of indecision. What do we declare for small things? The hydraulic weight of being looked at, deliberately, persistently. Then the durational string pluck of turbulence shearing prayer from the body's tarmac, the unpacking like an era that refuses to end or begin again. Here, have more night, the mind says, and as if from nowhere, here, have more blue. Are you feeling too simple? Are you wanting the glazed lake of memory to shoot up for air and take more of you back with it when it goes? Faces with wishes stitched across them like large quilts. And the sunset, even from this high up, tips down along the dark outcome of sky. Immeasurable beauty is immeasurable precisely until it's gone. And actually the last one I'll read is Simulacrum, which is on page 19. And this poem feels very characteristic of, feels like, if to the degree one can have a signature, I suppose, feels like a signature poem of this collection. I'm unsure why, but it just has this, don't know, maybe that's why I put it at the front. It's called Simulacrum. There wasn't love, but there was what love becomes. Sheet wrinkle, skin dune, arm ropes lassoing our neck flesh with push and pull, equal amounts. The hurt convincing its shape is false. The relation, the recorded moment he likes to record, not true. Then the film buffering, the unfinished triangle your body sculpts on top of his. Frustration, yes. Rejection, oh yes. The colons ring, hammering, waking up. Not again, not tonight. Tight, loose, bloodless for now. Dragging a palm across the brick wall. Now, blood for now. Streaming from you like scripture. Spit of him landing atop your eyelid. That puddled need. And there is freedom. There is intention to break your back in half and call it what you asked for, what your separateness will not allow. Rattle of wooden slats, indentations in the linen. This body you are finally inside of, being molded into the cushioned canvas by what desire has given him permittance to do tonight. Tonight only. He is not a perfect fit, and that is perfect. He will not stay the night. He will not stay. Hard night, leaking night, no fine point, needled stars. The sky is a masculinity. He starts the car, likes to be called daddy, needs to be called something, anything. There is your obligation. You're obliging. Call it gratitude. Be grateful. Give thanks. Give.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to hear your voice read these poems. Very melodic.
Thank you.
Really beautifully.
Tried to
read.
get into audiobooks, but hasn't happened yet.
Well, maybe for your own. Oh.
Oh, sorry, I did do my own audiobook. I meant like audiobooks for other people, because I feel like I want to be one of those people who's like, hey, this person's releasing a book. Do you want to? So maybe I should use my own audiobook
Yeah,
for like
that's
my
like a business
my
idea.
real sample. Yeah.
Okay, so that will be the next thing.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
audiobook.
yeah. That was a good publicist moment. There is also an audiobook if you want to hear me read.
Which I do
Yeah.
after that. That was gorgeous. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions.
Yeah.
But what we thought would be really nice was if sometimes I can turn the mic over to the audience during the conversation. So I think that's what you meant by like hybrid,
Yeah.
when you said that earlier. So I'll ask a question and then I'll like scan the room and feel free to raise your hand if you have a kind of like your own follow-up question or a new question. We're going to break this sort of like border here.
Yeah.
This is a conversation between all of us. And then we will leave some time at the end for questions a little more formally so people online can ask
Yeah.
questions as
Yeah.
well, or if anybody in here has like a burning question near the end or needs some time to think about it. So yeah, feel free to join us in this
Just
dialogue.
raise your hand like we're in school, just and we'll come to you when there's
Yes.
a natural lull.
Yes, but I'll also make some lulls,
Yeah,
some
yeah.
unnatural lulls
Yeah.
for you. Okay, so I want to talk about the title because first of all, it's such a gorgeous title, and you have the 3 poems, and you have the epigraph from Claudia Rankin that mentions the title as well. And of course, it prompts us to think ecologically, and it prompts us to think about the Atlantic, given the Rankin quote. But I'm also really interested in this idea of familiarity and unfamiliarity, and strangeness and strangeness. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about those evocations of the title and how it frames the collection.
Well, I think there's I guess metaphorical nature to the title in that as much as it does, Strange Beach evokes a place and evokes land and water, I think there's also part of it is an introduction perhaps to myself of coming into the practice of poetry from having been quite resolute as a performer, first as a trombone player, then as someone in marching band, doing color guard, spinning flags, throwing rifles and guns on a huge football field, and then into formal training of dance. And I really thought, I think there was a moment where I thought dance was it, like dance is like the thing, and then poetry revealed itself to me. And so there's a level of the title that I think is also the strange beach of that migration or incorporation of a new practice in my way of processing the world that was strange but very welcome. This idea of moving towards poetry. And so that I think that's one poetry was strange to me, whereas dance was something I always, either through church or just being a very energetic kid or trying to learn dance off of TV and eventually in dance through marching band, like dance was always there. Poetry, I think to some degree was there, but it just wasn't something I had been knowledgeable enough to know was something I might try to do. And so there was a strangeness, and I think there's a persistent strangeness of poetry, and I think that's why I love it, is that it is strange and warm and helps you just see dimensions of yourself or the world or a person's life that no matter how connected you may feel to someone's experience, there's always a kind of ontological strangeness in the exaction with which someone else can describe their life or their perception, and it feels as if they've plucked it out of your head and written it often the way you thought you may have been able to say it. And that is strange, that someone, that they can use a specific language that feels as if it's in this perfect sequence or has silence in the perfect places or punctuation or line breaks, and it can feel as if it is a documentation of your life. That, for me, is one level in which the strange works. So the mode is the strange, but what is familiar, going back on this idea of what's familiar and what's unfamiliar, I think familiar was the experiences. I mean, experiences of love, sex, family, a mother's as, you know, a first exploration into who one is. That feels very familiar and is often trotted land in literary practice.
Wow, beautiful. I'm like so interested that you got into the process of poetry and defining poetry. It's so interesting to hear. And also you write a little bit about your process too within the book. You have some self-referential poems, some Ars Poetica, which I was really drawn to. And I wonder, like, thinking about, you kind of give us some of your process, or maybe your intention a little bit with poetry, also in the book, in those Ars Poetica moments. And I wonder, could you talk maybe a little bit about how the process of writing poetry maybe pulls from the musicality of your other practices? And I guess when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking particularly about the line break, which you mentioned, because your line breaks are very varied and they're very musical, and I felt like there was a relationship there.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that, because I think I would say when people ask me about form, which often they're usually meaning kind of the overall external form, I would say really line breaks for me are more than the visuality or the shape or stanza conglomerations and sections. I think about line breaks as a form that I really want to, that I believe can be done right or wrong, and that I really want to, for some reason I'm thinking of right now the line, I'm thinking of George Oppen, who was an American poet, who talks about I think it's like a tiny essay called just on poetics, and he says, the image is the moment of conviction. And I think he's saying something about how images, I think he's, often is known for being quite short poems, very short lines, a lot of syntactical play. And I think he's talking about how the image is the moment of connection. I think he's trying to, maybe it's one of those railings against abstraction and saying the image is really what the capacity to sense is what connects a reader's sense on the page to the person reading it. Like that's where we actually get bonded, not in abstraction or other filler words. And I'm actually, the reason I'm bringing this up because I feel like maybe one of the things about this book is the line break for me is a moment of conviction. And I was talking about this a little bit yesterday in terms of just the line break for me is just where silence, in a way that when you're dancing, it's harder to see those a phrasing. Obviously, if I'm just moving, like it's harder to know where. Or I guess we can make the analog of stillness, right? Stillness could be equivalent to where silence is, and I think as I'm working with my line breaks in my text, I just really want it to feel as if the poem could end at any moment. And I don't want my poems to feel like just prose broken by lines. Like it needs to feel inevitable, and at any moment the poem could end, and then there's something, usually the poem, saying to you like, I'm not done, or there is more, or there is more complication or more nuance to be discovered. And that's why a line break happens, and then you have more words, and then it's at the end of the poem when the poem in a way dictates its own ending, and then it goes back into the silence of the white space on the page, which is turning the page, or the end of the book. It feels like trying to work with that as quite like a nebulous concept comes from my choreographic practice, where you're just working with energy, moving energy from your finger all the way like up through your elbow, in through your sternum, and like down out through your leg. Like that's nebulous, and it's that kind of, but you have to find, in the way that you have to find a form to dance, I maybe have to move. And my body becomes that form in the way that line breaks and language become that form on the page.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. We have a hand, which is perfect. Thank you.
Moving off of that, I think reading the poetry, I really felt the movement in the lines, which is so interesting. And I wondered whether you find overlaps between your poetic and your dance practices, and whether like one informs the other in different places.
Mm-hmm.
And just because I think, especially with certain poems, I almost like imagine a dancer in my mind while reading the words.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm going to repeat that for
Yeah.
online. So do you see, is there a relationship between your poetry and dance practice? Because Elsa sees kind of a dancer in their mind as they read these poems. Was that an okay? Yeah. Also,
Yeah.
is as a movement artist, I think.
Oh. Yeah, nice to meet you, Elsa. Yes, I wrote my whole master's thesis on the relationship between choreography and poetry, and I think the thing I came up with, that was really an exploration of how to use poetic compositional tools, ideas like line breaks or letters or language or like diction or tone. How could I take those quite literary methods or techniques of thinking and put them into like actually make physical methodologies that in some way can never truly get at them because they are abstraction, but in some way find and did that become about how we cut movement together. Often poetry can work with juxtaposition, so perhaps juxtaposing or cutting movement in a way that we wouldn't naturally, but that would be more natural if you were just putting two words on a page, which you can just write, flower, I don't know another word. You could just write flower bookshelf, yeah. And seeing can dance have that juxtaposition? Can we work with? And so that was like just about making methods, but I think really, and that's like a kind of procedural thing where you just kind of have to have the imagination to do so. Whereas I think the overlap is actually less in the methods and like thinking. You know, there was this, I remember I lived in Arnhem. I lived in Arnhem for a little bit during when Erasmus was something that the UK wanted to participate in, and I remember bringing to my supervisor. We were working with Louise Glick poem called The Red Poppy, and we made there was a whole dance that was made. But at first I was working with letters, and so I kind of, you know, the first lines of that are, the great thing is not having a mind. Feelings, oh, I have those, they govern me. And we were working with the letters of that, so T, H, E, G, R, yeah, and I remember bringing this to my supervisor, and he said, like, but to work with, and so what I would do, I'd make the dancers, like, we were doing very kind of cheesy, like, can you, like, almost, like, T, H, E, G, R, and, like, it was kind of cringe, but it was like, maybe we should start here. And I remember taking to my supervisor and him being like, oh, but you're not really working with poetry there. You're working with letters, you're working with symbols. Whereas to work with perhaps feeling or the rhythm of that, right? The great thing is not having da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Like maybe that is closer to working with the poem, not the letters, which could be in any other configuration. They don't have to be full words. They could just be nonsensical. And so through working with rhythm, and then we start to kind of color the page and like look at the line breaks, look at the words, look at where are the adjectives, where are the nouns, like that became a stronger way of working with or trying to get at poetry, though one is always perhaps approaching working with poetry asymptotically, as in you go towards it, but you maybe you never arrive there. And that revealed to me that actually the methods by which you might approach making poetry are just methods. I'm coming to a point, and I'm trying to arrive there. That are just methods of getting at presence, and that's what I think presence. I think that's what poetry and dance have intimately in common. Is they both dance in the act of moving stills the past and the future, or perhaps they unite in that moment of moving. And poetry, a poem that is really speaking to you, you may not start in presence, but it pulls you into presence via its rhythm. I won't even say of its content, because I don't know that, like there's a lot of poems that based on content or what it's about, I might identify with, but I really do think the rhythm, the conviction, the line breaks, breath, those are what gets into someone's body. It was really pleasurable to me as I was just reading to see a lot of you like doing your heads like this, kind of moving. That was really, because I was like, okay, right, so it's not so much about what I'm saying, but somehow we're all kind of locked in this kind of soundscape in this moment. And so I think it's presence that really unites dance and poetry more so than like any methods one could make to and I think that's what you have to ask yourself, do I feel, if I'm dancing, do I feel not here or there, but like now, do I feel now? And not do I feel now like time-wise, but do I feel now as in like, I don't know, in this moment in some way. And then in the same in a poem, do I feel present, or does it feel like does the language not hold me enough to be able to like make me feel as if each word is meant to be there? And you know, I often want my poems to feel almost like invisible ink on an iPhone, you know, like as you go across, the words become visible. That for me is presence. It's like each word appears to you and flows into each line as if it's being appearing out of the whiteness of the paper as you read it, rather than something that was there and is like there without you looking at it. It's something about feeling that it's coming up for you is important to me.
Yeah, such a great answer. And I think that idea of presence, maybe this is too simple after such a beautiful answer, but even like that kind of being active as a reader with the poem, I think is really important as well. I'm gonna create an unnatural lull in case anyone has sort of a follow-up, but thank you so much, and if you do have more questions, please do ask. And I'm gonna kind of want to follow up from that conversation. I want to ask a little bit about the body and embodiment, which seems like, I think, crucial to a lot of lyric poetry often. And I think, particularly in your work, the body is contributing to the collection's dynamism. It feels like very active, kind of like we've talked about. And it feels like constantly the body is shape-shifting in this work. And so in that way, it's not abstract and it doesn't feel always bound up in memory, although obviously that's present too, but very corporeal and physical. So I wonder if you could talk about this and maybe the presence of the body in these poems, particularly in those narratives of like desire, intimacy that unfold in relation to the body. So it feels like, very present, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I bring it back to the epigraph, which is, no, it's a strange beach. Each body is a strange beach. And if you let in the excess emotion, you will recall the Atlantic Ocean breaking on our heads. And I think I really, there's this, yesterday I said something that I'm trying to reconjure. It was something about, so the line is, each body is a strange beach. And so like my body has, it's made of skin and flesh and, metal temporarily, and the water inside and the food and intestines and everything. And then and dust and dirt and salt, and so there's this interplay of elements in my body, and so understanding that felt like step one. But then I also like to think of the inverse of that, which each body is a strange beach, which would also mean each strange beach is a body. And I think that perhaps might lead to a little like this idea of the body not being static in only just like memory, but this idea that if the strange beach, which is a metaphor not only for where water meets land, but perhaps like, there's also green spaces in this book, and trying to understand these other natural contexts as bodies. I guess perhaps there's a little bit of anthropomorphization, anthropomorphizing.
Don't ask me, I've been terrible.
Right, anthropomorphizing I think is in that, but I think it's trying to honor if my body is complex, which I try to register as complex. Can I imagine the beach? Can I imagine this flower? Can I imagine this bare breach? Can I imagine this willow which dips over into the river as its own body and give it that level of complexity? And so I think when you're picking up on the body not being static in memory, it's more that it's less perhaps that I actively was able to define and like imagine my body as other in other contexts, but rather I just saw or I guess I asked the question, what if this leaf was a body? What did that mean? What would that mean of what it felt? What would that mean of how it moved? What would that mean of its possibility to lift into the mind and into whatever its mind would be and be abstract? And I think, and it creates this kind of dialectic perhaps that's because to the degree that you can imagine my body as a beach and you can imagine the beach as a body, then in any way that you can see a body, it's almost like my body is shape-shifting, which is a great word, shape-shifting into these different non-animate but biotic things. And so, yeah, I think it had to do with trying to honor the complexity or see if that complexity could exist in ways that weren't only inside my body, but in the bodies of other I don't want to say things again, but things in my environment, things I could see. And same goes for the paintings, like trying to imagine those landscapes as being bodies, meaning that there's waste, meaning that there's emotion, meaning that there's movement, meaning that there's circulation, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Any questions from our audience?
I just like the idea that there's, I was just thinking when you were talking there about like strange features and how you know in the listening, my idea that I came in with about a strange feature's already changed into something else, and this idea, you know, of erasure and accumulation that happens with beach, you know, like I was just thinking about how in my head it was an image of a beach, but now it's changed already because of the way water changes the landscape, and that's like with the body as well, isn't it? We have experiences and then they disappear, but they somehow they're inside, and yeah. So something about this meeting the elements as materials, and you know, and something about like you know, really interested that you're working with dance and poetry, and something about like the intangibility of dance and the tangibility of language, and how you can read a book of poetry but you sort of have to go and see a piece of dance.
And on that, right, yeah, like the dance will be done once you finish, you can't see it again, but there was, hopefully for a brief time, this moment of identification with the dancer. You know, we know when we see other people moving, we are able, it's kind of like when you walk past someone and you both try to get out of the way, and like, but that's a moment where you actually had like radical alignment with them, because you both went to that same place and then you noticed the other person was doing it, and it's not actually that you both misinterpreted the situation or who had more force to go forward, but rather that both of you like saw that was going to happen and like almost did this kind of duet together. And on this idea of strength and like the body, us being susceptible to change, like the beach, yeah, things coming and washing away. Today we were in Portobello, and we got to stand on the beach, and we were looking at the tide, and yeah, it was just, you know, it was low tide, so the water was far, but you can see like all these pools of where water has been, and tomorrow, even now, it's probably different than it was 2-3 hours ago when we were there. And I think considering the body as that, where these memories and experiences wash across, and you know, sometimes maybe like a shell or an animal or something is washed up and then, you know, is in the sand and continues to like be there even though the water has begun to recede. That's kind of like almost how memory works, or experience, or pain, and it kind of just begins to burrow and it becomes a part of that landscape that is also your body. And I think that sense of movement and always and flux, but never permanence, I think for me is important. There's a line in this book where I say form does not cure change. Change is the disease glimmering inevitably, or something like that. And I think change, which is a really painful and beautiful, but it doesn't matter whether it's painful or beautiful, because you don't have a choice about it. Change is what we are all indebted to in that we're able to grow up, so we must change, but it also is a catalyst for loss and pain, but joy. And so it's actually quite a neutral force. It's just something that is, it's different than time, but it's like perennial, like time.
We have a question here, but I just wanted to say very quickly that I think that sense of recursiveness and like putting forward a line or language or an idea, and then sort of like the water, allowing it to recede, is so present in your collection, and like presenting an idea, and maybe speaks to that idea that you were talking about earlier of presenting a line, but not until you've read the previous one. So this kind of idea of recursiveness and discursiveness really present, and maybe we can talk about that too. But I would like to go to this question here, and maybe I'll give you the mic.
Thank you. So I asked this question as a fellow artists working across different media and genres and fields, and I wonder if you also feel a pressure, internal and or external, to pick one lane, do one thing, like not try and do all of the things, and kind of find one lane and stick with it. And if you do also feel that pressure, how do you fight it?
Yeah, I for a little bit of time thought the idea of being a purist would be beneficial, and I think some people are able to do that, and I often wish sometimes I'd started caring about words and language a little bit sooner, and I wonder, though I don't know if I would have ended up going towards poetry. I might have gone towards a different form. I might have gone towards, I don't know, journalism or something. So I guess you never know where you're going to end up. But I don't know. I often say I got an aesthetic education. I marvel. I don't know. I don't know. Marvel is too grand a word, but I haven't had any super formal training in poetry, but I used the aesthetic education I had as a dancer, which aesthetics is about beauty, which is about the spirit, which is so I feel like I learned how my spirit wanted to move, and poetry was just one of the modes by which I was given to track and note that mode. Other modes have been as a trombonist. Other modes was color guard, which was one of the craziest, cultiest color guard. So color guard is a like marching band, basically marching band, the people who dance with the flags and the guns, and they throw and they go like and they dance betwixt the members and throw rifles 50 feet in the air, and catch them as they spin. That's what color guard was, and that was real physical education for me, and also training with danger, because we're constantly, and you don't recognize it, you're like 14, 15 when you start it, and so you're kind of malleable and will heal, but it was really dangerous, and I think it taught me how to risk. It taught me how to risk, and if I hadn't done that, I don't know if I'd be as I always forget, is risk averse someone who's good? Risk averse means I don't want to risk things, right? So I'm not risk averse. Yeah. I don't know if I like it, but I'm more willing to take them. And I think going to poetry was one of those risks. How do I fight off the need to be one thing? There's sometimes where I want to tuck away and just go back. Like there's been a lot of book engagement the last 7 months where I really felt like I'm a writer. Though I teach choreography and teach dance at the university, and I engage the Rose Choreographic School. But for me, sometimes it's just about, like, my practice is this external thing, and I move between them. And just because I'm in one lane for now doesn't mean I can't forget, going back to this idea of like experience and memory and aesthetics, like I can't forget who I am when I'm like in choreography mode, even as I'm writing poetry, and vice versa. So I think I just had to get to a point where I think just toiling between the idea of whether I should do both became a method of actually not engaging with either. And so it was I just had to go. And so I don't know if that's a great answer, but I think you just have to go. You just have to go.
I think that's a great answer, and some good advice for even those of us who are writing between genres, not even disciplines. Yeah, over here.
Hi, so just before my question, are you from the States?
Yes.
So I hear you were from the States and then you moved to the UK and then you spent some time in Europe.
Yes, 2.5 months in Arnhem.
Those like changes and then your changes with different interplay between the two disciplines, but how does that moving around also like played into shaping your artwork?
I'm gonna repeat for
Yeah.
online. So, how have the different places that you've, I suppose, lived or been in or studied, how have they changed your work or impacted your work? And I think this is like a great question because place seems very present in your book as well. Maybe not always literal place.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because that's where I was going to start with this. There are some places in the even at the end of the collection where I ask the reader to be, there's the last poem is called Night on the Thames Path, which is the path along the Thames. I don't need to tell you that. And that is a really literal place where the different sea fowl do bird things. But generally, I think this movement from place to place, I think it's made me quite a nomadic person. And I think that, or I feel nomadic, even though I've been in London now for 7 years, I think it's made me very comfortable with being in my head. If you go to my room, it's not, I've been in that room for almost 5 years, and I just put up in this past August 2 paintings on the wall, both by Edvard Munch, one called The Sun and one called Three Girls Over the Bridge. But if you were to walk into my room, you wouldn't really know it's my room. And I think that for that reason, I've become very comfortable in the space of my head and my imagination, which I think is why a lot of the poems don't begin in settings, or they vaguely suggest a setting, or they begin in the manner of, say, poets like Carl Phillips, in just psychic landscapes. And the landscape is actually like you're drawn into a musical landscape or an emotive landscape through the sound of the words, through the suggestion of feeling, through these actions or these perceptions that could take place anywhere, one would hope, but often take place nowhere. And being in that nowhere, for me, is just, it feels like a very electric space. So I would say the movement from place to place has actually just made me comfortable with allowing me to really be in the lyric mode, which is just kind of this, can almost feel like sometimes this void out of which, it's like if you're in a room that's dark, not dark lit, but gray, and just all of a sudden there's like this vortex or this speaker that starts, like a megaphone that starts speaking from over here and then starts speaking from over there, and you're just kind of turning and you don't know where the voices are coming from. I mean, that might be some kind of medical condition, but used creatively, that can often. And it's great that you pick up on that, because I've actually, one of the things I've been trying to really work on is setting, and as I'm writing new work, trying to see what is the value of saying, like, I'm writing this thing where it's set in Austin, Texas, and I've had to like remember what it was like to be in Austin, Texas, and that's very difficult for me, knowing how to describe things and really look at a landscape. I'm not a really big architectural person. I remember how places have made me felt, but not the places themselves, which I think is where I go towards. So I'm actually on a new journey and challenge to kind of be concrete with places. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
I love this idea of a psychic space and your poem kind of living in a psychic place or space, because I do think they're still so situated, like each individual poem is so situated, and I think it is the music, the landscape of the music, or the character, or the subject, that makes that space feel so precise. And then sometimes you do have actual places like But yeah, gorgeous. So I'm gonna open it up to questions, maybe also online questions at this point, in case there are any. Okay, so there aren't any online questions right now. Maybe some will turn up in a few minutes. Any others from the audience?
Yeah, could you say the Strange Beach poems are based around an artist's painting?
One of them is that true? Yeah, one of them is. The third one, not all three of them, though there are different, so not only the Strange Beach ones, but some of the other poems, like Ski, which is a really big combination of an Edvard Munch and a Dorothea Tanning painting. There's one poem called On Natalia Goncharova's Gathering Firewood, where I've just put the title of the work into the title of the piece, into the title of the poem. And so that they're kind of like littered throughout the collection, often when I just couldn't. Sometimes it's very difficult going back to this idea of setting. Sometimes I like to find a setting or use the setting of an image as a place to project my consciousness into and say what would happen if I were here, which happens sometimes in snowy landscapes, for example on that beach, the sunflower.
Is it I haven't had a chance to explore the collection yet, but is it something that it's important for us to know about, like when you get to the poem, will you be able to tell it's linked to that, or is that more personal?
No, it's not important that you go see the image. So
or that we know it's from that image.
No, it's not important. And sorry, that's not to say that the works aren't important, but that's just to say that I still want the poem to be self-contained, though I would hope it might lead you to go see that. And for me, I would say the use of painting is really for me, has been a technique to train myself just to see, and to see deeply, and to see clearly, and to see further than, and often I can imagine and describe more. I can be more imaginative within the limitations of what the painting and the color and the perspective and the light. I can be more imaginative within those limitations of what I perceive in the visual versus when I'm just at my desk and I'm like closing my eyes, trying to imagine somewhere. It's just, it could be anything, and therefore it can sometimes just feel a bit nowhere. Whereas, you know, if I have, let's say, a blue painting, like then it matters that I use the color red or in the language, which isn't to say red isn't present, but it's to say like that blue suggests also its opposite, and it suggests itself as well. And so it gives me more latitude to think about what is there, but also what else might I include that may not so neatly sit within the image itself. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like any poem that's sort of a response to something often prompts you to think about language in a different way, or the object in a different way. And you're right, as soon as you see the color blue, you think of like its opposite. Like it evokes that. I have a question about lineage, because we've kind of talked a little bit about the painting, which exists in the realm of this work, but also the Rankin quote, and then I think there's Didion and the Odyssey. Like there's different intertextual moments as well. So I think there's also all the poets that kind of, or writers that exist that have also written about the Atlantic. Like you mentioned Lowell, like in the blurb too. So I'm curious about this lineage and this intertextuality, and maybe not only in literature. My question was framed around literature, but obviously you have a background in so many disciplines. So I'm curious what literature or sort of other works of art do you find yourself in conversation with in this work, or maybe even you said you're working on something new.
Yeah. Well, definitely with the ones named Edvard Munch, Dorothea Tanning. I think the poets that feel most in my mind when I think of this work, I think of poets like Louise Glück, who is my Dickinson, and Jory Graham, who is my Walt Whitman. I think of poets like Ada Limon and Natalie Diaz, who had their own exchanges, but whose work teaches me how to be. Natalie Diaz's work teaches me how to be precise and inventive within syllables, whereas Ada Limon's work teaches me how to just say something, to just level with somebody, to be like, you know, see that kind of rhetorical, like, I'm going to tell you something that doesn't need to be threaded and covered in gloss, but it's just going to be very simple and direct. So I think of poets like that. Of course, I think of poets like Claudia Rankine, from which the epigraph comes. And yeah, I think that was really important to me, to feel as if I not necessarily was writing a book that they would be proud of. I don't necessarily need, though I would like, their validation, but like just to write something that does come from, does feel like it leads back to other people's work, or there's, one of my favorite, I don't know if it's a favorite quote, but a quote I think about is Billy Collins, who says, "Your voice is made up of the people who are on your shelf." And I do think about that and have been able, and this is something that I think is another, I suppose, a difference between dance and poetry, is that being a dancer, you learn to dance by trying to copy, emulate your teachers to the T. Like, it is important. You feel better about yourself the more you look like them. Whereas with writing, it's often that you're told you don't want to be derivative, or you don't want to sound like them, or it sounds like you're just trying to doing these sloppy imitations of someone who's already done something innovative. And I guess I just didn't really have that, because I'd come from dance where the goal was to be like the people who taught you. And so I remember when I first started writing poems and have gone through these phases where I felt very pulled by Glick, or very pulled by Carl Phillips, or very pulled by Natalie Diaz or Jory Garamar. I was very much just trying to write poems that sounded like them, and that didn't feel like a bad thing. That felt like training, and that felt like also acknowledging that, when you're copying your dance teacher, I mean, maybe when you're younger you don't have a conception of this, but I think the more you dance, the more you recognize two bodies can never be the same, and so no matter how high you can get your leg, how much you can bend over to the side, or how flexible you are, or just how exact you might be able to do a movement, fundamentally because you do not occupy the same positive space, like my body is here and your body is there, we're not in the same, the movements will never be the same. Time, you perceive time differently than I do. You perceive the weight and grip and the muscularity of your body differently. So no, even if our outward forms look similar, our body is in and out, and those two things can never be the same. And I think I accepted that as a poet, which allowed me to do what were very sloppy imitations. I was just like, well, I'm never gonna sound like, I'm never gonna be able to get that just grand, explosive, but true, way that Jory Graham gets it. I'm never gonna be able to get the short, hermetic, austereness of Louise, the way that she got it. And I think trying to copy them has really just been good for me to learn, okay, how does that fit into the burgeoning voice I feel? And so whatever is glib, or whatever is whatever isn't mine will fall away, right? And whatever is actually something useful to me will stay. I do think about that quote that's like, good artists imitate, great artists steal. I steal a lot. There's a lot of stolen lines in this, and yeah. Not to say, sorry, that wasn't me saying I'm a great artist, but that was me saying just take it and use it, and it will reveal itself to you how it actually needs to sound in your voice.
Well, I will say it. I think you're a great artist, and I think you mentioned a burgeoning voice, and for me, the voice is so strong in this collection. I so enjoyed reading it and listening to you. And so many things that you've said have really stuck with me. This idea that no two bodies are the same. So you can never be precisely the same in your movements. Also thinking about how in the future we won't be the same person. So how we interpret our own ideas will change as well. And it's just just feels like, yeah, just as dynamic as the collection itself. This conversation has been so wonderful. We have maybe a couple minutes for you to close off with a poem, and then we can give you a huge round of applause, because that was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this, and again, thank you for hosting me and being here. I'm gonna read maybe just one poem. This is a poem that was inspired from Portuguese beach. It's called Cruise. And yeah, it's called Cruise. It was written, or the inception of it came in Portugal. Cruise. Because in the bushes we know desire is wrongly and often named wind. The birds stay away from here, the ashy skin of the train tracks leading us into one another like a storm approaching the gut. 3 seconds, they say, it takes to decide whether he is an animal or my animal. For the duration of our reservation of touch, we share in the thicket of used condoms, consecrating our want to be empty as ghosts, disheveled of intellect. This heavy weaponry, a calm thought before the million flickerings like sand sprayed up by sudden sea change. I stand outside myself at the dune peak like a god, without intention to intervene, to interweave, watching old sunglassed Portuguese men mill and thrust back names they've never known but idolize, the sky disassembling itself into discretions as he, yes him, clothed in sunburn, waves me over to his grotto, wanting to make of my body a haunt, a place he can step into now and never again as someone wholly sentient. Oh, dark lightning of pleasure zapping us into instants. Oh, big-mindedness flitting the current as in now. Where is the way in? Where is the man who found slumber on the tree, cradling his penis like treasure? I had, I swear, just seen him discarding the sacred, hard memory, bouquets of rubber rabbit brush, dirty and dry baby wipes, sand, shit drawing sand into clumps and back out again as the tide muddies. Is that what they say? Are we in error of biology or to it? What is natural? What is reason? What alive? Crickets tossing up smooth syllables between the soundtracks of parting. Sensation. Be enough. Thank you.